Welcome, everybody. This is our usual, more or less, monthly meeting where we have a presentation by some organization and then an open discussion about it. Today's guest and speaker is Dr. Mike Cifone, that in a part of his life is a professor of philosophy in New York University, but now a visiting professor in Europe, in Germany. But more important, he is the founder and president of a strange object, that is the Society for UAP Studies. That is what we are interested in hearing about tonight. So please, Mike, if you can share your screen, or if you want to take the control, it's up to you.
Yeah, molto grazie. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for stopping by to to listen, to hear, and interact with me. I'll try to do a good job. I see some members that I have not met in the society present here. Others, of course, that I know. I'll do a good job not to scare anybody off. So what I'm going to do is I'd like to actually read a kind of a position statement to kind of set the framework within which the society operates, and kind of my initial condition, as it were, for founding this organization and the journal also that is associated with the society. Then after this sort of position statement, which is actually something that's incorporated into the documents when I onboard people that are sort of formally volunteering with us or otherwise formally related with us, I have something called a volunteer agreement or something, cooperation agreement or something, but it just kind of makes certain things clear. And after I talk about that, I'll move to the presentation. I have, I don't know, something under 95,000 slides. No, okay, only 20. But I can talk very briefly about the society, and then you can just kind of ask me questions about it. I can kind of give you an overview of two things: of the organizational structure that this year I have sought to clarify and expand in administrative scope, and which we're now kind of I can't quite yet say hiring. I hope soon hiring, but we're onboarding a number of people very rapidly, so the organization is very quickly expanding. So we'll talk about that administrative and operational infrastructure that I'm currently developing. And then also, of course, what we all care about are programs, events, scholarships, scholarly activities, and so on, which constitutes the core activity of this organization, which is, of course, structured as a nonprofit in the United States. So, and to my European colleagues, of course, I apologize for the political chaos in the United States. It's a very unfortunate moment that I have to that we have to endure. But in any case, so here's kind of the position, right, that with which I have begun, and with which I see the society to have also been initiated. So the society values its stance of what I'll call positional neutrality as a force for legitimacy of this thing that doesn't really exist, which we're helping to help to be born, which is UAP Studies, right? So positional neutrality I see as a force for legitimacy of UAP Studies in a purely scholarly register. We believe that this is really the only effective strategy for legitimacy of the topic broadly understood. Okay, and this topic encompasses what we might call different departments. We can talk about that, the sort of the academics sort of differentiation of UAP studies into a sort of empirical component and a sort of humanistic I guess in German, Geisteswissenschaftliche, you know, the humanistic aspects of the study of UAP, and then you have the social scientific study of the subject, and cultural studies, and so on and so forth, right? So UAP studies is a broad category of academic, sort of a field of academic research, and it has these different departments, and they all operate in different ways, and they correspond with each other in different ways. We hope, right, to sort of crystallize the formation of something called UAP studies, and to help differentiate between these different, as it were, departments of this field, right? So we believe that this is really the only effective strategy for legitimacy of the topic, right? We are not a disclosure group. The society is not concerned with disclosure. We are not concerned with what the government does or does not know. We certainly care about transparency and informational access. We care about mitigating the various complexities that often arise when the government is involved in the topic. But ultimately, we recognize that government operates with respect to different guiding principles, of course, primary among which being national security. And that we see as being fundamentally incompatible to the essential democracy of information that must exist for any true scientific, scholarly study of anything, and UAP, of course, in particular, right? So we are not a disclosure group, though, of course, you know, we advocate for transparency and openness and so on, and informational exchange. Nor are we an advocacy group like, you know, other UAP focus groups. We don't advocate for a thesis that attempts to resolve the nature and or origins of UAP. Rather, our advocacy operates at what you could call a meta-theoretic level. We advocate for the rigorous empirical, humanistic, and social, scientific, cultural study of UAP from the vantage point of scholarly objectivity. And I put that in quotes. Even when it comes to the UAP as an experiential object, that is to say, something that is encountered, sometimes at close range, and for which anomalous experience is sometimes, but not all times, had with these objects. That we treat as an issue that can be studied in a rigorous way, bringing to bear the relevant kinds of methodologies and objective scholarly structures that attempt to situate that kind of a phenomenon in a way that is legible to the academic community at large, right? This is how we understand UAP studies. It operates in a strictly scholarly register, right? Even when we have to deal with phenomena that cross over into the anomalous, the extraordinary, and so on. Scholars deal with these sorts of things all the time. There's something called esoteric studies, right? Often in religious studies, we deal with experiential phenomena for which, you know, contemporary scientific frameworks have a difficulty wrestling with and dealing with, right? So from a strictly scholarly standpoint, the fact of engaging, you know, with objects, experiential questions, and so on that drift into these more extraordinary sorts shouldn't, right, impugn anything having to do with one's scholarly objectivity, and therefore these questions and phenomena can certainly be considered to be legitimate objects of scholarly engagement. Okay, this is what we advocate for. So we are happy to work with organizations and groups who share this vision and whose work requires this foundation of academic legitimacy. But again, we are not advocating for specific theses that attempt to resolve the nature and or origins of UAP and any adjacent phenomena. We are certainly open, of course, to a whole range of possible explanations, right? UAP as a category of phenomena is a very complex category, right? as we all know. But we are not advocating for a specific thesis that attempts to resolve the nature and/or origins of UAP, as I said. We are certainly open to, among other possibilities, the so-called NHI, or non-human intelligence thesis, but merely as one potential hypothesis among many that can offer some measure of resolution. I personally think that it could be a very good, if not the best, explanation for some, but by no means all, UAP incidents. But that's a dialogue we need to have with the wider scientific community of interest, right? Because especially with respect to UAP, and this is something thematized recently in the journal Limina, which we'll talk about later, these phenomena often present in a very ephemeral or transitory, or as Bertrand Meeus puts it, elusive way, right? And that requires, I think, special care methodologically, as many of you have recognized in your own work, to be able to structure a sustainable, transgenerational, and academically well-situated research program that could provide the data on which we can then reason about how to resolve some subset or perhaps all UAP incidents. But that's the point at which, right, we need to get, which is to have serious methodological, conceptual, foundational discussions about the kind of data and research programs that need to exist, especially with scholarly legitimacy and scientific legitimacy, to sustain them, so that we're not debating the data anymore, but rather conclusions based on the data that we all agree is legitimate. Okay, and I believe in order to move to that point, we need to resituate, right, the phenomenon well within an academic framework under the sort of heading of UAP studies in the ways that I'm trying to outline here. So this might be a minor shift, but I think it in perspective, but it's a shift that makes I think all the difference, right? So if we can separate commitment to a conclusion versus commitment to the methodological and foundational rigor that's required to establish a coherent and enduring methodological framework to deal with these kinds of phenomena, I think, right, this helps further the legitimacy of the subject as a scholarly pursuit, especially in the sciences and the humanities and so on. So this is why I emphasize we are not committed to a particular thesis. We're rather committed to the foundational work to imagine, right, how research programs, methods, and frameworks should be designed in order to study these kinds of phenomena. And to make contact with the other, sort of adjacent academic disciplines that can contribute, right, to that that discussion, right, and especially making contact with already existing academic disciplines that already enjoy legitimacy, right. This is another important strategic pivot for the field, to be able to make contact with colleagues in other well-legitimized fields who have something, right, important to contribute to these methodological and more meta-theoretic considerations, right? So, so making contact with the existing academic fields, I think, is crucial. And this is also a personal goal of my own research, to make UAP studies broadly understood, to encompass empirical, interpretive, and political or social dimensions of the contemporary phenomena of UAP, legible to the wider academic community. I am committed, of course, fully to this, and that's what I personally advocate for, and what I founded the Society and our journal to accomplish, which is, again, scholarly legibility of UAP studies, of UAP as a studies as legitimate as any other in the academy, right? Alongside many other studies. So that's just kind of my position statement. And now I can just talk about, so, what is the society? What are we doing? How is it structured? and then just kind of give you a broad overview of what we're doing, what is going on, what are our future directions, and then we can kind of stop there. So I don't have to talk much longer. So yeah, so I'm Mike Cifone, founder and executive director, otherwise known as the CEO. In the nonprofit world, you tend to call yourself an executive director, not the CEO. It's a sort of a culture thing. We were founded in I gotta move you around because I can't see my slides. We were founded a couple of years ago, back in September of 2022. I can talk about the origins and stuff, but I might skip about why I got involved. You kind of get a sense of what that is. We can talk about the output activities. We'll talk about Limina and some of our initiatives. Sorry, I have to keep moving this. Can I make you disappear? Yeah, I can. I'm sorry. I make you all disappear, so I'm basically talking to myself here. So I apologize that, but I can't see my slides if I can see you as well. So what we are is a nonprofit, right? Which is very important especially in academic pursuits. We are not about profiteering. We're not about exploitation. We're not about making money, but we are about generating funding and serious operational support for the infrastructure, operational, logistical that we are developing. So we are honest about that. We do need money and funding, but not only for operations, right? We function primarily as a learned and professional society for serious, empirically responsible scholars, researchers, and organizations devoted to the UAP enigma, right? We bring together active scholars in the sciences and the humanities and dialogue and collaboration on UAP studies broadly understood. So this is one of our core functions, right, is to contribute to a cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary discussion, primarily along methodological lines, sort of meta-theoretic lines about, how does one stabilize and wrestle with phenomena as transitory and as difficult to study empirically as UAP, or as experientially extraordinary as sometimes they tend to be for people. So we want to contribute to a kind of a critical mass, right, of that interdisciplinary and even cross-disciplinary discussion, but in the interest of the formation of a new scholarly field, right, UAP studies. Again, as legitimate as any other studies that does enjoy a placement within the contemporary university ecosystem, right? So this is kind of our ultimate fundamental driving mission, which is to kind of instigate the formation and then ultimately crystallization and stabilization of something like UAP studies with these different departments: empirical, humanistic, social scientific, etc. Right? I think it's a very unique opportunity here. There are lots of interdisciplinary kinds of fields, and in fact, when you talk about a studies, right, like American studies or European studies or environmental studies or science studies, those fields tend to be very interdisciplinary. But I think what's unique here about UAP studies, or at least there's a unique opportunity to bring together academic fields that typically have developed very far apart from each other in terms of language, discourse, practices, methodologies, expectations, goals, right? Look at the hard sciences and the philosophers and the social scientists, right? Or, in critical theory, in culture studies, they speak different languages frequently. But here you have an object, namely UAP, that because of the complexities that are inherent to the phenomena, require a kind of a reintegration of historically individuated and separated academic discourses, right? This was a kind of this is a sign of progress in the academy based on the German model, right? Humboldt, of distinguishing academic fields into specializations, right? But the problem I think we face today is that hyper specialization kind of creates a Tower of Babel effect, right? Where we no longer speak each other's language, and we kind of are embedded in those specializations, which does allow for progress, right? As we specialize, we can produce perhaps more, but we lose that ability to integrate that dialogue and those discourses into a comprehensive, right, integral view of various objects of study. In this case, it would be UAP. So it's if for no other reason, right, the UAP phenomenon acts as a kind of, I think, a concentrator, a potential object of reintegration of these discourses in the sciences and in the Geisteswissenschaftliche, the humanistic traditions, philosophy, and so on and so forth, right, and culture studies and history, to bring these academics and these discourses back together, right? So this is another thing that has motivated me, is to kind of provide the organizational, operational, logistical infrastructure to help facilitate, right, that kind of reintegration, that cross-fertilization that I think we could really have in something called UAP studies, right? It's almost an opportunity for a new renaissance in a way, right? And I'm really committed to that. So there's a lot of energy, I think, that we can create by bringing these discourses back together and mediating between them and finding perhaps a new vocabulary that draws on these different disciplines, right, but which creates something unique for this unique object, which is UAP of study. So we intend to function as a unifying organization, right? We are a professional association and also a learned society. So we don't see ourselves in competition, right, with any other group. We hope to build ourselves with all of you, all of academics and the professionals who are involved in the various aspects of investigation and study and case report compilation, to generate a critical mass of professional and scholarly engagement together to create, right, an ecosystem within which we all operate, right, as professionals, as scholars, to kind of keep ourselves in check and create those professional standards, best practices, standard operating procedures for how we conduct our empirical, humanistic, or social scientific research with respect to the topic. So we hope that the society, right, will be that force, like the Royal Society, like any learned society, that is a community of professionals' endeavor, right, that creates the necessary checks on our work and our progress, that can kind of gauge our effectiveness, our scholarly output, our integrity, et cetera, as professionals and scholars in the field, right? That's what a learned society does. It polices itself, it checks itself for holding itself accountable to legible, objective standards of scholarship and research, right? So that's what we are building, is that administrative infrastructure, right? So we engage in a number of activities that further the kind of professional development and further helps to crystallize the field, right? So we engage in a number of activities to further that end. I think I've probably explained why we need something like the society. And look, I mean, the society, I don't want to say, this isn't about we're the only thing, but I think that we need more organizations like professional associations, right, that are serious about discussing methodological, meta-theoretic standards of scholarship and applying them to ourselves and keeping ourselves in check. I think the more the better, right? The more professional associations that exist, I think that helps us kind of gauge, what are we doing? What are the standards? What are the best practices? How do we keep ourselves in check on that score, right? As a society of professionals and scholars focused and in dedication to a particular subject, right? So I think thus far, the Society is perhaps the only such organization operating in this kind of meta-theoretic way. But there ought to be others, right? I mean, so hopefully we will together, right, inspire other organizations to kind of think about these things as well, right, and to get serious about that. I'm going to sort of get right onto our operational infrastructure, like the sort of the nuts and bolts, as it were, right, of the Society itself. So broadly speaking, the Society has kind of two departments, right? There is the operational side of any organization, right? And that's the administrative infrastructure that kind of keeps the whole thing going together as a whole, right? But operations, that is perhaps the most general aspect of the Society. Then there is what we call the programmatic side, and we'll get to that in a minute. And our organizational structure is divided into kind of in these in these core divisions here. We have, of course, the C-suite, the executive team, leadership team, which directly reports to the board of directors. So that's kind of the fourth division. And then there's the operational division, which structures and organizes all workflows and SOPs and so on and so forth. And then we have, of course, the programmatic division, people that are in charge of our events and programs and academic education curriculum and other activities that we are engaged in. So we are a learned society, right? We are society professionals and scholars. That means that our model of governance really requires a steering committee to be a kind of a brain, in a way, of the organization. So at the heart of the Society is that steering committee, and technically it is a non-binding advisory council. And it provides, what you can call sort of strategic oversight, right? As we expand our educational curricula and bring in new instructors for our courses, for example, that we'll talk about, we are engaged in a great deal of pedagogy, which is a very important component of scholarly activity, right? There's research and there's pedagogy, and these two form a virtuous, well, we hope, a virtuous circle, sometimes vicious, because the teaching takes from your research and the research takes from your teaching. Unfortunately, these things often compete for one's finite attention. But these are the two most important scholarly activities that, of course, we provide administrative and logistical support for: research and teaching. So that is a huge component of our programmatic division. That is curriculum development. But as we develop curricula and as we consider instructors to teach with the Society, we have to be careful for reasons of content and credibility and legitimacy for somebody to teach, right? And so there has to be oversight. Not only on the course content itself, just the general framework and structure, that it's well-grounded, et cetera, in a literature, in a discipline, but also that the instructors, right, are competent, et cetera, and that can teach the course which they propose to teach. So we need a council advising us on things like that, a curriculum development, instructor profiles, content as well, like the Society, right? We have events, we invite speakers, and that becomes the content that we then manage in the social media environment. That has to be carefully thought through and so on, and that has to be steered properly, right? Again, we are not an entertainment company. We are not interested in that. We are interested in providing a recognizable professional source of information and a trusted interface between scholars and professionals who are actively engaged in research on UAP and the general public at large, right? And so that constitutes the two sides, and as it were, two of at least three sides of the society, the three faces that we have, right? One is the face we face the community of scholars and professionals studying UAP. But we also face the general public, right, and offer them resources, activities, projects, outreach activities, community engagement, right? But also, thirdly, I haven't mentioned this yet, although in my position statement, I made it clear that we are, of course, an independent professional and association or learned society. We are independent of government. We do not have government funding. We are not beholden to any corporate or any other interests. Our donations are unrestricted. They have there are no restrictions on them. We do not accept that, right? We operate independently and autonomously for the benefit of the free pursuit of research into UAP, right? Again, there's where that positional neutrality is absolutely crucial for us. But even so, that being said, we do see ourselves as playing a vital role, not only in interfacing between scholars and the general community of interest, the public, but also providing a structured forum within which government researchers, analysts can interact with professionals and other scholars who are themselves studying UAP that might be relevant to the ways in which government is dealing with analyzing and processing their reports, right? I think we need to have this structured sort of autonomous space of interface between government agencies, government officials who are actively involved in processing, analyzing UAP data, and the scholars and scientists who might have something very valuable to contribute, right, to that conversation and to aid in developing best practices and methods that help move us coherently and legibly from data to conclusions, right, to provide like a kind of a roadmap, as it were, right? Because often, government analysis could frequently be a black box. You don't know exactly, they have input in and then output, but you don't know what actually goes on in between. What are the standards of evidence, for example, which is a topic for one of our workshops that the society is developing, right? Working groups, actually. What are the standards of evidence being applied to what kinds of data, and what are the necessary and sufficient conditions that establish the data as legitimate, right? We have to have this kind of broad, meta-theoretic discussion across, different organizations and researchers and academics and government officials to kind of set the ground rules so that we're not always debating, well, is there even a there, right? Which fortunately NASA has accepted that, in fact, there is, right? Which is in itself a very important development in UAP investigation. So the society sees itself as, as playing, these different roles, interfacing with, of course, the professional community and scholars, providing a juncture point between scholars and the community, and also we are attempting to develop that sort of structured space for the exchange between scholars and professionals and government agencies and officials that are involved in UAP research from the governmental side, right? So the steering committee provides oversight for all of the development of these programs and activities and the proposed future directions that the directors of the society, that I as CEO and my other C-suite colleagues are trying to sort of push the society to go in. So we need to have that non-binding advisory council to provide that strategic oversight to make sure that the society is guided properly as a learned society, as a professional association ought to be, right? And that, of course, is an ongoing dialogue, right? Right now, so we've got, a number of strategic roles that we're actively recruiting for. Director of Public Relations. We have filled our role of Director of Operations already. I'm in negotiations with some volunteers for outreach and strategic collaborations manager, and also a senior research advisor. So our core roles, I would think, here are our director of education, which we've hired. I'll talk about him later, Michael Glosson, also with another organization, SCU. Our director of academic events and programs, very important as well for the substance of our organization, and also director of research programs. There's a whole suite of projects that we've envisioned, partly from myself, partly from other colleagues, that we plan to have regular meetings for, working groups, etc. And that working also with our journal for publication of results and research, etc. So, right, we're creating, I think, hopefully a very virtuous ecosystem here for serious research, but also for pedagogy, right? As you research and as you learn and as you understand these phenomena more, it is more opportunity then to structure that logically for exposition in the context of pedagogy, which is another really important scholarly activity. It's the communication and the foundational communication of knowledge and understanding about the topic, right? So our roadmap for staffing and strategic growth, we're in the sort of phase one. I am developing sort of the core leadership positions and interviewing for them. Phase two, we have our support layer. I mean, this isn't necessarily the chronological order. A lot of this happens simultaneously, right? Synchronically, not necessarily diachronically. Coordinators, administrative assistants, and specialists, and so on. And then, of course, phase three, which is a very important discussion to have with our team, is strategic expansion, right? As the larger we get, HR has to come into play in a more serious way, and also the question of grants and so on, and various financial instruments that can aid in and to be a resource for the community, which I'll talk about a little bit later if we have time. I have some ideas for this. But anyway, so here's a position classification. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting some interruptions. I mean, so you have the executive level, the director level, the manager, coordinator level, and then the support staff, right? That's a standard corporate structure. So our strategic growth and in personnel and leadership is pretty strong at the moment. We're experiencing rapid expansion at the director and manager and coordinator level, which is strengthening both the operational and programmatic capacity, right? As we bring in the core directors in education and programs and in research, we're greatly expanding our activities and the scope of the society, right? The recruitment pipeline, we're drawing exceptional talent from both the nonprofit leadership and academic research sectors. Also some from corporate, who are interested in helping us, at least in terms of administrative strategy. So we've got a wonderful director of operations, Mr. Rafael Di Carlantonio, who's Brazilian, living in Italy. He's a seasoned industrial engineer and operations leader from corporate industry, worked for Toyota and so on. We're getting really, really highly qualified candidates, really passionate about, this is the wonderful thing about, the beginnings, the first 3 to 4 or 5 years of a nonprofit. You get a lot of people, at first at the volunteer level, who are really passionate about the mission and the goals. And that energy is just absolutely fantastic. It can be intoxicating as well. So I'm really excited. We just had our first directors meeting, but we're bringing new leadership on board every month, right? Almost every week. So we're expanding rapidly. Like I mentioned, Mr. Carlantonio is our director of operations, key strategic role, right, to help us cohere as a nonprofit corporate entity. But on the programmatic side, We have, as I mentioned, Dr. Michael Glosson, academic, who actually I think is in my field, in philosophy of science. I think the focus more on the life sciences, if I recall correctly. He is now our current director of education. He's also affiliated with the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. Some of you, of course, may know that group. SCU, one of the most excellent sort of think tanks on the subject. Again, we're not in competition, right, with these organizations. We see the society as playing a key strategic role, right, in legitimizing and stabilizing academic, empirical, scientific study of UAP. So in a sense, we're an organization that is helping other organizations, right, find a kind of a balanced stability, right, with a very, a subject that's very historically fraught by bringing to bear, legible academic, scholarly, scientific standards on the subject, right, and legitimizing it as any other studies is in the academy, right? So we play a crucial sort of meta organizational role in bringing together different organizations even for the purposes of developing professional standards and so on. So, for example, on our board of advisors, we have people from, well, of course, your leader, Michel Vaillant, of course, is one of our distinguished board members, as well as Rich Hoffman, who's on the executive board of SCU. So we are not an organization that is in competition, but rather we are even perhaps more than complementary. We are a ground up, community effort to professionalize ourselves, right? So we are acting in the professional interest of all organizations. And so we encourage participation from all groups. In fact, we ought to have a representation from all serious research organizations at the society. There's absolutely no reason, right? Why not? Just like the American Medical Association, right? You're going to have doctors and so on, parts of other groups and research coalitions, but they all come together, right, in the AMA for professional development purposes. And there are many examples of that. And one, and this organization does not exclude the existence of any other professional association. Of course not. And the more the better, in my view. So Michael Glosson is our director of education, also with SCU. I think he does a podcast called UAP Studies podcast as well. So some of you might know him on that circuit. Dr. Adam Dodd, a fantastic academic down under in Australia. Having organizational meetings is kind of hard because Europe is in the middle, the United States, and then we've got all the way over in Australia. So it's hard to find that meeting. But with passion, any hour of the day is fine. Adam is fantastic. He's a brilliant academic, one of the sort of class of new academics coming out of the shadows and being totally honest about, yeah, this is an interesting topic. There's no reason to be afraid to study it as an academic. We know how to deal with tricky, difficult subjects. We have academic structures that allow us a measure of objective distance, the objectivity, right, that scholarship is able to institute as a subjective matter for our engagement with these objects. These objects may be interesting to us personally, right? But we make clear that that there is that objective structure of study in place, and that legitimizes the study, right? Just like someone might study, the tradition of tantric yoga. I have a George Feuerstein's excellent book on tantra right here. That's something for which people can have a subjectively powerful engagement, but also be a scholar, right, of tantric yoga, right? There's no problem with that in Buddhist studies and religious studies. Lots of the scholars are also practitioners, right? And their scholarship is analyzed along a different axis of evaluation. And this is another, I think, crucial point to make, right? Which is that some of us have deeply held commitments to a particular thesis about, the origins of UAP. Some of us may have been an experience or may have had experiences that have motivated us to become researchers. That is usually a card that the skeptic will play against you, that you are an interested party, as we say in the legal field here, and that somehow disqualifies you. Well, that's a double standard, right? Because people, for example, in religious studies or cultural or political science, are often subjectively engaged with the thing about which they study. So that should not be, right, a reason for disqualification. Surely that is not at issue. Whether my beliefs are one thing and my scholarship is something else that can be evaluated independently of that. So in any case, so Dr. Adam Dodd's taken over for our academic events and programs. He and I are synergizing on a number of different interesting working groups and projects that will energize and I think bring together a number of academics in different fields that don't necessarily, again, talk to each other and that are adjacent to some of the issues that we deal with in the UAP world. But that's one of our sort of essential goals is again, right, to bring together academics who don't necessarily study UAP, but who might be interested in the topic and applying their academic tools to that topic, and therefore also interacting with those who study UAP. So getting these cross-disciplinary connections to be had, right, further aids, I think, in the development of a kind of legibility and legitimacy of the subject within the academy, and to make that a kind of a stable presence. So Adam and I, we're working together with a number of our colleagues on a number of working groups and other events. Also events like we have our standard panoply of events like Distinguished Lecture Series that we've created in honor of certain figures in the field, like J. Allen Hynek. I also have a Cosmos Lecture Series we invited last year. We had Adam Frank give a talk. Of course, Adam is much more skeptical. But Adam is very much aggressively interested in developing the right kind of scientific framework for studying UAP. He tends to take a more skeptical view about the nature and origins of UAP, and that is perfectly fine. We want people like Adam, right, involved with in our events and having these conversations, right, about methods, right, about the ground rules of study of these.
De perguntar?
I think someone, yeah, I think somebody's got to be muted. There you go, Raphael. I think I saw it was you. Okay, so anyway, so Adam Dodd is with us. David Metcalf, you might be with us now. I can't speak more highly of David. He should speak for himself, but he's a known writer in this field for many years. Brilliant guy, who is our director of social media and digital communications, and helping develop our sort of brand presence. You have to think about these things. What is the society? How do we want to right, communicate to the world, to the public, and what is our what is our digital and communication stance in this space, which is a very fraught and difficult space, and we are trying to open up a space of sobriety, of stability, of objectivity, of balanced and respectful discourse across a range of different perspectives, focused on the meta-theoretic, focused on the conceptual foundations, questions, right? Where a lot of more academics can participate in that discussion, because they might not necessarily, right, want to go down certain hypothetical routes. And this is writing a crucial strategic move, is that we pivot away from focus on, well, UAP have to be explained by this or that, hypothesis, versus, well, wait a minute, how do we actually study, right, these phenomena which present with such challenges, the ephemerality and elusiveness, right, being one of the most key signatures of these phenomena as empirical objects. We have to have those meta-theoretic, right, conceptual discussions. And then when you drive down to that hypothetical level, the question then is, what is the data on which my hypotheses are based, and for which my evidence is evidence for, right? Which is a crucial, right? This is a crucial distinction that Gary Nolan recently in one of his Soul Symposium discussions pointed out, right? Evidence is always contextualized with respect to a hypothesis, right? A very key distinction. But that's the kind of discussion we have to have, right? these meta-theoretic questions. What is data? How is it supposed to be structured, especially in relation to the particular issues that UAP present? What is evidence, and how is that related to hypotheses? What are the relevant sets of hypotheses, and how do we move out of the space of conventional hypotheses to the unconventional? What's the roadmap, right, that takes us from data to evidence to conclusions? These are meta-theoretical questions that even people in the astrobiology and the SETI community can have with us, right, in the UAP world. There's no reason why they can't participate in those discussions, as they do raise deeper philosophical questions about the nature of science and methodology, right? Then that is perfectly a legitimate question, right? In any case, so I don't want to get sort of lost. So in all of this, government oversight. So we have sort of 3 or 4 items here. I mentioned our advisory council. We have our board of directors, which is the ultimate legal financial authority, as is common in any corporate structure. We've developed leadership policy and so on around our organizational structures, as I've been trying to characterize to you. We also have in place conflict resolution policy and so on and so forth. So we're building that administrative infrastructure that keeps the organization flowing smoothly. All right, so what are the activities? I've been mentioning some of those. This is kind of now more from our programmatic division. As I mentioned, we appointed Dr. Adam Dodd as Director of Academic Events and Programs. We're launching a series. You can see some of those on our website under working groups, under our projects. We're developing a series of working groups around, I think, key areas of UAP studies that really need to drill down to these sort of conceptual, sort of foundational questions, right? There's this question of best practices and standards of evidence. And I've designed a working group, and I've talked about this with Michel Vaillant and many of your colleagues at UAP Check and many others. That's a kind of broad conversation that the society has to have, of course, but all of us have to have that together collectively, and bringing in, I think, members of the astrobiology and maybe SETI communities to talk about standards of evidence, just like was done for the detection and communication of extraterrestrial life in the astrobiology community. Some of you may know, right, in 2022, NASA, I believe, sponsored a working group which produced a white paper, which was then submitted to the American National Academies of the Sciences for commentary and ultimate sort of approval. And that is kind of the model that we should pursue here with respect, I think, to the science of UAP. We need standards of evidence, and we need standards of evidence developed in tandem with and in concert with other colleagues in other adjacent areas like astrobiology and so on, who have already thought through these questions. And how can those, how can those processes and standards and so on, how can they be adapted for the particularities of the UAP? Right. NASA, right, has a mandate to do something like that, to bring to bear its existing assets, the sensor assets and so on, to bear on the question of UAP. But unfortunately, currently, there is no one now directing, as far as I last recall, there is nobody now directing that effort at NASA. That is sad development, but an organization like the Society for UAP Studies, in concert with many other organizations, we can, I think, help instigate, right, NASA's involvement in that, in these very important and foundational methodological questions. We can get to hypotheses formation later, right? But what we really need is stability and standards of evidence surrounding data and analysis of the data to produce evidence for hypotheses, right? That's a little bit downstream. And that's where I think the broader scientific community now, given NASA's stated mandate to study this and so on, and the seriousness that it's taken now within the US government, aside from all the chaos going on now, and other governments, of course, like France has many decades of serious interest in Spain and in Latin America and so on. There is a lot, I think, here that can be brought together for the purposes of developing these standards of evidence that can be broadly legible to the scientific community. and maybe even approved by something like the National Academies of Science, right? For example. Anyway, so that's just one example of a kind of a working group that we would like to organize and regularize at the society. Another really crucial area, which kind of drifts more into this question of UAP as as a case study in anomalistics. I know a number of you guys present here particularly are interested in that topic. Danny, for example, I'm on, who published with us last year at Limina. I know this is a particular concern of yours and your colleagues at the Institut für Grenzgebiete in Freiburg, which is, you know, so sometimes the UAP is an experience, right, as an experience that people have, drift over into something like an anomalistic kind of a category of phenomenon. And so, but what are the relevant academic disciplines that can be brought together to synergize on that question of methodology and study of anomalistics in that way, right? There are, you know, there are traditions that study mind-matter relationships. The IGPP, for example, has studied that very formally. There are traditions in philosophy of mind and neuroscience and so on that deal with you know, complexities of conscious experience. And the scientific challenge with dealing with anything involving any aspect of human consciousness, and in particular when those experiences sort of rise to the level of the extraordinary or the anomalistic. So we can bring together, right, these traditions of mind-matter researchers, anomalistics researchers, philosophers of mind, and UAP researchers who don't necessarily all talk to each other, but who could perhaps, right, come together again around UAP as a particularly interesting and complex subject matter, to synergize and cross-fertilize and perhaps develop a very interesting and complicated and complex dialogue that could yield some methodological insight about how to deal with UAP when they become this kind of interestingly complex experiential moment for someone. And I've written about that in my editorial published last month or a couple of weeks ago. God, the time is just escaping me. So that's a working group I'm actively developing with one of the authors of a series of papers in this recent volume of Limina. This was the Professor Gress, who replied to Bertrand Meust's essay. He and I are developing a working group, bringing together very well-known philosophers of mind that I was very delighted to know they're interested in participating in a discussion about how UAP is and the experiences of UAP are relevant to their own discourse, right, and their own research questions. So I see there to be a lot of potential for collaboration there. And let's just see how it works, right? I mean, this is what you do is you get together academics for workshops and working groups, and you know, you see what kind of percolates out of those discussions. And that's what we really love, right, as academics. And that's another sort of modality of our activity is the workshop, right, method. And we of scholarly activity, which is you don't have to have anything formally prepared. A workshop is where you want to work your ideas out with other colleagues who can offer you the kind of criticism that you need that produces better work. And that's another thing, you're right, in this field is what we need is criticism, right? Not dismissal. We need other colleagues reading our work and working with our ideas, not to dismiss them, but to develop them even better, right? To strengthen them through critical, respectful, but critical, sometimes harsh criticism, in order to push forward the ideas. I am, you know, I'm a Hegelian, I guess at the end, I'm the labor of the concept, right? It's labor, it's effort. You have to, you know, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, right? This dialectical movement, I think, is necessary for progress. And it's back and forth. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? That's the heart of the society, dialogical, critical work, right? And that's what I hope to see, right, in our programs and our events, and our initiatives, curriculum, even in our curriculum, right? In the classroom is perhaps the place where that critical dialogue happens, sort of from the ground up, with someone, a mind just coming to that subject, who forces the teacher, right, to learn, right? And that's the most important thing, is that scholars themselves, right, have to learn. That's something that Heidegger, for example, pointed out, right? So anyway, I apologize, I'm getting lost, but we have a number of other activities, sort of planned. Of course, very distinguished guest here, Dr. Jean-Pierre Raspail, is going to provide to deliver a series of seminars on which he is very hard working right now, formerly of Japan, as many of you know. Well, he will cover his very long and distinguished career studying UAP. We are really excited and very deeply honored to have Jean-Pierre with us, probably, I think, in the fall, later in the fall. We're also hard at work on curriculum development. One of the key things I sort of suggested this is, foundations, right? We need foundations courses, introductory courses that kind of lay out the landscape, not just of UAP studies, but also which is retrospective and reflective on, what I call the sort of tradition of classical ufology, right? Which kind of precedes this post, I don't put 2017, I sort of would say post 2021, with the emergence of academic groups. Although in 2017, I guess IFEX was founded at Würzburg. And this is sort of this new turn, right, where academics who are well placed within academic structures and systems and institutions are now turning to this question of how do we organize the study of these transient sorts of phenomena, right? What are the methods and best practices? And so we see, and especially post 2021 with Harvard's Galileo project, emerging UAPX, right? University of Albany getting involved in the study. We have to pick up from where the what I call the classical ufological tradition in many ways has to leave off, because ufology is about sort of the case report compilation, systematization, interviewing witnesses. It's a kind of a forensic pursuit, right? It's a necessary preliminary stage that provides motivation and preliminary data, right, that informs the structure of what is now emerging to be a new science, right? And this kind of interface between the investigatory modality of study and the sort of more stricter non-forensic scientific approach to observation, experiment, and maybe theorization later forms a virtuous circle. In a sense, the classical ufologist, right there, this is the field researcher, in a sense, the field of observations that are then that then work more with the stricter sciences to provide insight into structuring more rigorous observational frameworks to capture the data that could then be used to perhaps resolve some subset of UAP cases, maybe all, probably not all, but at least help us not only to resolve, but also to classify and systematize, right, these observations, which is another important stage in the science. And that's what you're seeing now, is the emergence of a new science, right? And as you have that, we have to look at the history, right, and understand what's changing, what's different, what's continuous, what we've broken from in the past, and so on, right? So that's a really important foundational component of the society, which is this pedagogical aspect, developing foundations courses that help us reflect, right, on the history of the phenomena, but also just the history of the way that it's been done. Like Greg Aghigian, for example, one of our colleagues, has recently published, in English, probably the only sort of authoritative history since Dave Jacobs, text of, what was it, 1975, I think, right? So that's kind of the sort of thing we need, right? Is a historical consciousness that sort of orients us into where we are, where we've come from, and where possibly are we going. And that is something also that I think is foundational in the classroom, right? Pedagogically, is that historical consciousness and allowing students to get oriented in a kind of literature, right? And And here's where, you know, we interface with projects and organizations like UAP Check, right? For example, you have this fantastic project of sort of gathering together all, you know, research materials and theses and dissertations and so on UAP and UAP studies and adjacent subjects. This is where, right, our curriculum draws from the work of UAP Check, and it informs the pedagogy, right? Crucial tools, right, that we're building sort of together, as it were. Yeah. So so we have, you know, in terms of educational strategy, you know, we have this two-pronged approach. We've got the general and sort of continuing education aspect, which is where, you know, just the general public and students can kind of get a sense of what's going on, at least, you know, in the past, and then also going forward with this new turn towards science. That's a sort of interface between the public and scholarship and the forefront of research, right? And in this subject, whether we're talking about empirical or philosophical or cultural research, right? But we also, you know, as a professional association, as a learned society, we're also interested in collaborating, of course, with members of the community to develop professional development seminars for both researchers, right, who aren't necessarily investigating or dealing with UAP, but the subject, and also for investigators, right? I think there is an opportunity here for us as a community to collectively impose standards and regularize UAP, the classical sort of model of ufology, right? The investigation, the sort of forensic investigation. And that brings me to yet another working group that I am actively developing with some members of our editorial board at Limina, which is to kind of thematize forensics, criminology, and the foundations of those kinds of investigatory procedures, and bring that to bear on. So how has it been done with UAP? Has it been done poorly? Is it, you know, what is the quality of that? Have we been serious about, you know, imposing these standards of forensic science and so on? What are the best practices in forensics? And what is the forefront of forensic science and criminology and so on? And what are the best practices that should be imposed on the investigators of UAP? So we have to sort of, again, go back to the sort of conceptual foundational level to kind of think about, so what is grounding this as a serious pursuit, empirical pursuit in terms of investigations, right? And that helps professionalize investigation, which then, right, can interface with the sciences and form, again, something like a virtuous circle. So we're developing, originally the idea was to do a special issue in Limina, on like UAP, investigations and forensics. But that kind of turned into a working group where we'll get scholars together, not only in UAP, right, but also forensics and intelligence community and people who do these kinds of analytics, and see what sort of synergistically emerges from that, and then publish the fruits of that working group labor in a special issue of Limina to highlight the importance of like really being serious about UAP investigations as an important professional mode of investigation, right? Which could then be useful for law enforcement agent, or agents of the government who are charged with, right, recording and even following up on UAP incidents, just like you see with the Japan and the gendarmerie in France, right? So bringing people from Japan involved with that kind of ongoing investigatory work, bringing them into contact with others that may not even know about Japan. And the excellent work that they have over 40, 50 years done. So, and in this way, we position the society hopefully as not the only, but as a central authority in professionalizing UAP studies through pedagogy, scholarly dialogue, and training and methodology, right? So I know I'm starting to talk a lot, so I'll just kind of like go through some of the stuff, some of our other activities and outputs. So one of I think our key output thus far has been the journal Limina. It is expanding, growing. There's lots of interest in it. Again, having working groups kind of angled towards the production of a special issue, right, where we highlight these key research areas, right, in UAP studies to kind of map that territory out for future scholars, right? This is really just like we're laying the groundwork for the continuation of UAP studies long into the future, right? That's what Limina is trying to do. There will hopefully be other journals like, right, that pop up in English. I know there are some journals in other languages. Of course, the Journal of Anomalistics in German language, also published in English, deals with some of the UAP stuff. Also, of course, JSE has historically, was founded by Sturrock, right, several decades ago, that often published stuff in UAP or UFO studies, I guess, as it was called then. You had JUFOS, of course, our colleague, distinguished figure in the UAP UFO world, Dr. Mark Rodiger, right, the protege of Hynek, JUFOS, right, was for a long time the only serious, English language academic sort of journal. We picked up from there, right? In the foundation of the journal, I sought the advice of Dr. Rodiger for months, as well as other individuals in the independent academic publishing world. For example, I was very heavily influenced by Dr. Harold Atmansbacher at Mind Matter Research. In fact, I announced that in my first editorial. Anyway, so we have Limina. We have a number, 3 or 4 special issues being planned. I'm really excited about those. Here's our first issue. This was designed by someone I'm sure all of you know, Mr. Andreas Müller, who also published a letter to the editor in this very edition. He and I worked closely in Germany to produce this. It's his design, beautiful design, with Hynek lecturing, I think, at Northwestern University in the early 1960s, I believe. That is our print version. It is, of course, an open access journal. We pay for this. The Society for UAP Studies manages and publishes this. So the funding is from the society, right? This is not uncommon, right? Mind Matter, for example, my inspiration has a journal, Mind Matter Research, that is associated with their learned society, right? So this is a very common practice, of course. We don't only publish, right? This is a journal that is open to absolutely anybody, and most of the articles are published by people that are not part of the society. So this is kind of just an open access, double-blind peer review journal, right? We impose that standard. I, as the editor-in-chief, I impose a sort of a double structure there, not only peer review, but also I attempt to balance independent non-UAP scholars and UAP sort of focused researchers to kind of get a balance on evaluation of the content and logical cogency of the papers, the quality, right? Quality control, which is super important. It's especially important in the UAP world for I think for obvious reasons. Anyway, I can talk about the journal, of course, limina, from the word liminality. It's a term that I don't know where it was sort of coined, but it's used often in anthropology, right? When you have tribal leaders that usher a young individual that crosses a trend, the sort of threshold into adulthood, right? There's this liminality that kind of threshold that they cross, right? Which is disorienting, where you're still a child, but you're entering into adulthood and, coming of age and so on and so forth. It's that transitional, disorienting kind of a thing. That's one meaning, right, of limina. But that's where we are. We're transitioning, right, from the kind of classical world of ufology into this world of sort of academically stabilized, legible UAP studies, right? So this is also a kind of a meaning behind the journal. It sort of reflects it's a reflection on its own discursive process, right? It would be nice if we could be acquired by an independent publisher, right? I'm happy to have the Society for UAP Studies manage and publish it. It is a lot of work just to publish one volume. It's a lot of work. And it's, it can be expensive, So it would be nice if we could have Limina taken over by a journal, a publisher of some repute. But that comes at a cost to the author often. So I have made this completely free for submission and access, but somebody has to pay for it, right? So this is tricky. So if we hand it off, we might get sort of credibility, but then, it becomes an expensive venture for somebody to publish, sometimes thousands of dollars, right, just to publish an article. So I don't want that to be the case. I prefer it to be independent. So maybe we could go with something more like Imprint Academic, who publishes titles you may know, Journal of Consciousness Studies, very famous, and Mind Matter, of course, Dr. Atmansbacher's journal. Open to suggestions. Future plans, the society is aiming to be very deeply, and this is of course a product of my own love and my own heart for Europe and elsewhere in the world. I am a student of many different traditions in Asia and Europe, in the Middle Ages and modernity and so on. I have a very trans-historical and multicultural disposition personally, and I've tried to imprint that to this organization to give it an international sense about it. And that means that, all of our international communities need to conduct, in a sense, commerce of ideas. Currently, it's English. It used to be French. It used to be German. And many hundreds of years ago, it was Latin, which was the unifying language. Right now, it is English. And my goal is to create a press, right? The Society for UAP Studies press. And the initial project I'm hoping there is to translate key works from Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, German, Russian into English with commentary and a new introduction, and to produce scholarly works and texts for not only general consumption, but also as instruments for the advancement of scholarly study, right? So that is one of our major projects. We've been discussing with different authors about gaining access to their works, and then of course negotiating a share of that revenue, obviously. And by the way, for our instructors, for our educational curricula, the instructors retain 70% of tuition. We're on a tuition sharing model. And something like that, right, of course, for authors. This should be an opportunity for scholars to receive some kind of material compensation to sustain, right, the scholarly activity. We need that monetary sustenance to keep going, right? All of the great art and philosophy and music that I love, it was always supported by patronage, but I'm trying to create an ecosystem here at the Society which is partly driven by community support. So I want to sell people on not sensationalism, but scholarship, the boring stuff, right? The administrative stuff that we need for infrastructure and stability and predictability in UAP studies. That's boring. I want to sell that as what is necessary to have the legitimate foundations for the subject that is independent of the news cycle, the interest in government that may wax and wane, right, over the decades. And we know all of you guys present here are very well versed in the history of disclosure and all of the stuff. It comes and goes, right? Even this talk of imminent disclosure. I've heard that. How many times have you heard that, right? It's sort of this apocalyptic millenarianism. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. But no matter what your perspective there, I think we can all agree that some kind of independence from these sort of cyclical, these cycles of interest that's one of the functions of a learned society, is to sustain interest and material support for people to study this, right? So as the society moves into the direction of full operational funding, partly driven by a community drive, right, where we get people in the community interested to material support us for just a few dollars a month, right, or something like that, to sustain our operation and our administration, then to move us in the direction of not only program funding, conferences and so on. These things cost, and having them in person is really important, I think, as well. It generates that kind of offline synergy that is really often more meaningful than the structured stuff. But also to move us in the direction of the society being a source of funding. In the three typical funding avenues open to any academic, right? One is scholarships for students, getting them interested in studying UAP, and all of the departments of UAP, empirical, right, humanistic and social scientific. There are lots of students, I'm sure, who are very, very interested in this topic. So scholarships to support students, fellowships to support, early, mid, and late level career researchers, right? We need fellowships. 3-month, 6-month, 1 year, like what I received in Germany starting soon. Fellowships support scholars just to do their thinking and research, right? That's what we need. And also grants, right? So at a certain level of funding, of course, we have already begun to develop the internal infrastructure for the administration and disbursement of grants to be a trusted resource for the ability to hold a certain amount of money for grants, and then perhaps to offer applications for grants to the society, and have an independent grant assessment team, right, that will evaluate proposals and then make the award each year. So this is what I would like us to accomplish. That's the sort of the long-term vision of the society in terms of operational strategic funding, right? So we have a lot, we do have a lot going on. We have a lot of online courses. There's a lot of room for expansion, as I mentioned. We've had very successful courses. For example, our phenomenology series taught by Dr. Kimberly Engels, who's recently published a very important article outlining the importance of philosophical phenomenology for the study of UAP. She taught a series of very successful courses. Also, physics courses are very, very popular. So Dr. Matchadagas of UAPX at University of Albany taught a very, very popular course on this question of physics of exotic propulsion, given that some of the preliminary evidence that we have for UAP seem to indicate some kind of strange, to put it mildly, propulsion mechanism insofar as these objects are technological artifacts of some kind. So we've got our whole range. We have Ted Peters with us, Dr. Ted Peters, a distinguished theologian who's teaching a course in theology and on UFOs and American culture. We just had an anthropologist, Dr. Bill Dewan. Maybe some of you know him. He's also, I owe him a paper that I'm very late on in an anthology of works by academics who are interested in UAP. And Dr. Dewan is now with us at the Society. He also taught a course, I think it's called UFOs in American Culture, a very fascinating deep dive into the whole history, the fraught history of UFO as it intersects with American culture, U.S. American culture. Anyway, you can check out all of those courses. We're also, we're talking, somewhat preliminarily about certification in UAP studies. It's something that Mr. Robert Powell and I have discussed. It was his idea actually to have like certification, sort of like board certification. This is kind of a preliminary discussion we've been having. The society could offer professional development courses that would satisfy the requirements or partial fulfillment, right, of some kind of certification process. But that's a little bit of a long-term goal for the community, but that's something that we could put on the table, right, for which our curriculum development would actually, would be very much relevant. I mentioned the lots of workshops that we have that we're designing. I mentioned that how important workshops were. I mean, so when we had our conference in August, which I hosted from Porto in Portugal. It was very successful with these workshops as the opening event for the conference, which were closed to the general public. They were just open to academics. But that focused intensity, right, where colleagues in academic silos, like in the humanities, in the sciences and so on, got together in closed session, not with, fully developed papers, but they're workshops, right? So the purpose is to come in with something, right? Maybe 4 or 5 pages of an idea, but then to have your colleagues kind of like, critically engage with you to try to help develop your ideas much more deeply. Those were really successsul. So I've been in discussion with Dr. Adam Dodd to develop workshops on an ongoing basis, but also to have those to be a key component, a key constituent of our annual academic conferences going forward. Possibly even just having events that are like only workshops with like maybe a closing plenary session, sort of like a panel discussion kind of thing. So the workshops are really, really important, especially as the field kind of is getting sort of more and more organized. I think workshops are actually more appropriate because not a lot of people have a lot of well-developed work yet, and we need to give space for that development, that intellectual work to happen so that we have a well-developed, well-grounded, well-worked out field, right? Which takes years, maybe decades to kind of sort of stabilize, right? We're in that initial sort of period of that. Resource development, I mentioned, an amazing resource that we have on our website that developed by UAP Check, your team, under direction of Michel Vaillant and your colleagues. This bibliographic resource, absolutely crucial, right? This is one issue I discovered, when I was first learning this. I'm sure a lot of you have realized this yourself, is that, a lot of work done on the subject is not indexed. It's a very basic thing, right? When you publish an academic paper, and this is what we intend limina, right? There are certain criteria that one has to meet in order to be indexed, and we are actively working towards satisfying those criteria. The work has to be indexed so that when researchers are researching the topic, they can see the work, right? So, for example, the Journal of UFO Studies, Dr. Mark Rodigers, who took over from Hynek, right, in the 80s, late 80s, when Hynek moved to Arizona and then eventually, unfortunately, died. It's not indexed in an academic ecosystem, right? All of us know about it, and we can gain access to it in various ways, but it has to be integrated, especially electronically, within the existing indexing ecosystem, and that gains access, right? That knowledge is power, and so I mean, you gain access to that, and then therefore you can advance in our understanding of these topics. So researchers often have a great deal of struggle of just kind of getting resources, and you can't just find it on the open research resource tools, right? So that's another project for us, is to integrate and to make our indexing interoperable with other indexing, and to work with indexing nonprofit organizations who do compile this data to get it in there and get it listed, right? That's another direction of legitimacy, right, for us as scholars of UAP studies, right? There are some other possibilities of resource development I've listed here. These clearly are many ways they're collaborative efforts. These are not just, it's not just society. These are community efforts. One interesting project that I'm in discussion with some of our, we have a wonderful production editor for our videos out in Los Angeles, my old hometown, is to collect sort of videography, like the best vetted videos on capturing these phenomena, right? But to do it in such a way that we have it analyzed also, so we come along with commentary, perhaps pro, like as they used to say in Latin, pro et contra, right? For and against, right? So to have the video, and to have an analysis for and against a conventional resolution. That I think would be an interesting tool, research tool to kind of compile. We've seen a lot of, really interesting UAP documentaries, and they often will have, like really cool video. To bring that together and have it commented on and vetted in some process to do that and bring it together and put it onto the society. And maybe we can share that with other organizations as well, or develop that in concert with others, like UAP Check, for example. Anyway, it's just some idea, somewhat random. We talked about certification. This one I will sort of put to the side. I want to bring this to a conclusion. Again, we're a broad organizational framework, right, for bringing together many different kinds of academics from different fields for that sort of interdisciplinary discussion centered around UAP, hopefully giving birth to a stable field, UAP studies. I think it is forming, but this is still very much in process. Allowing other groups to develop highly focused coalitions for UAP studies, right? I mean, so when we have a professional association, then other organizations can just focus on their own tasks. Like Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies focuses a lot on scientific analysis, right? Analysis of data, often sort of, investigating cases like Nimitz and so on, right? Providing like excruciating detail to substantiate an analysis of those cases, right? So we are, as I said, a complementary organization. We are sort of a meta organization in many ways, offering opportunities for sustained collaboration, further internal or cooperative development through cross-disciplinary and inter-organizational dialogue, right? So that is kind of the meta level summary. Please consider, supporting us or affiliating with us as a professional or a strategic collaborator in some way. And we value you, your expertise and your work in this field. Thank you very much for listening to me